Excellent, Beth. That's a wonderful introduction. Good morning, one and all, and it's great to see you on this glorious Friday. Welcome to part 3 of our legislative advocacy series. In part 1, we reviewed and overviewed the history of economic development legislatively here in Florida, the good, bad, and ugly. In part 2, we heard from Commerce, from FDOT and the state college system on their priorities as expressed through legislative budget requests. Today, in our time together, we'll learn about notable bills and initiatives and discuss your and our legislative priorities for FEDC. So with that, let's get after it. I'll turn it over to our Vice Chair of Advocacy, Jeff Hendry. Jeff?
Thank you, Casey. Want to welcome everybody. Again, I just think these sessions have been very, very valuable to me, and I hope they are for you guys. Darrick's doing a super job leading us through this. As Casey said, today we're going to focus on some notable bills. I think we're in the third week of committee weeks, and I think there's 3 more left, 1 more left next week, and then 2 in December. I believe that's correct. And then we'll be launching this. The session will start on January 13th. So lot to get covered today. And again, want to strongly encourage you guys today to stay on for the entirety. I think the last 10 to 15 minutes, we are going to use that interactive tool that Beth referenced earlier to kind of get your direct input on key legislative priorities for the organization. And with that said, I'll turn it over to Darrick to lead us through this morning's session. So Darrick.
You all are doing well. Thank you very much, Jeff, for the introduction. Welcome to our time together. So as Jeff before mentioned, we just concluded the 3rd committee week, which was last week. We have 3 more to go. So there's one scheduled for next week of November 17th through the 21st. Then they'll take off for the Thanksgiving holiday, and then they'll come back the first 2 weeks in December. So the week of December 1st through the 5th, and then the 8th through the 12th are 2 consecutive committee weeks. And then once they finish those out, they'll be done until they return in the month of January for an early session. As a reminder, in the even years, session begins in January and concludes in March. So January 13th January 13th through March 13th is session 2026. Many of you probably will have questions in regards to whether they'll finish on time. My hope is yes. Reality is I don't think that they will. And we'll talk a little bit about that. But I put together a PowerPoint, and I'm not one who will kill you by slides. I think just kind of put some things in perspective. And so since we're talking about notable bills and initiatives, I want to kind of just bring us up to speed, kind of level set where things are, if I may. And so just kind of where we are three committee weeks later, right? Where are we at? And so here's what I will share with you. First and foremost, the governor and the speaker are still at odds. And this is a carryover from the previous session where we know it was public that the governor and the speaker had a spat. It began really with the governor calling a special session earlier in the committee weeks in February of this year regarding immigration. And both the speaker and the Senate president took exception to that. So they gabbled in and immediately gabbled out, and then gabbled back in their own special session. And ultimately they ended up passing an immigration bill, but it led to a lot of friction that continued on through the 2025 session, through the downtime of post-session life, the summer, the fall, and it carries over to this day. And so they're still at odds with each other. And I anticipate that will continue through the 2026 session. It's also important to know is both the governor and the speaker term out after this upcoming session, meaning this is their last session in their respective offices. They'll still be in office through November, of course. Secondly, the Senate president is still quiet. And I put that there because many have asked, including reporters, where is Senate President Bill Albritton when it comes to some of these hot button topics, mainly property tax? Where is he at? And he's been pretty quiet, as has the Florida Senate. So I'll talk a little about that later on. But 3 weeks into committee weeks, that still remains. As of today, all agencies have released their legislative budget requests. They were actually due September 15th. By statute, they're due on the 15th of October. But when we have an early session like we will have, they do it a month early, which is September the 15th. And so those who were part of the webinar last month, you heard Adam Calloway from Commerce kind of mention some figures that they put in their LBR. I'll kind of touch on that. The Department of Commerce, they're asking for $25 million of non-recurring for rural infrastructure fund, which is a big deal. $50 million for the Job Growth Grant Fund, which is also a big deal. They're also asking for money regarding the Florida Defense Support, regarding workforce development and things of that nature. And so the department is being active and being engaged. And we know that Secretary Kelly has been a great champion and great supporter and a great ally for the work that is done in economic development. But all those LBRs are out. They're actually available on the Florida Fiscal Portal. I'm happy to share that link to Beth and get to all of you guys. Property taxes is still the topic and will continue to be the topic. That was the topic a little bit during session, coming out of session this summer. It's going to be the big topic this upcoming session. Number one priority of the governor is property tax reform. Top priority Senate of this House Speaker, property tax reform. The Senate President's been quiet, but it's going to be what everybody's talking about during the 2026 session, and it's really going to create a major elephant in the room, to the point where we could see one, if not two, special sessions if they're unable to come to some kind of agreement. I'll speak more about that later on. We now know who our designees are for Senate President and House Speaker. Jim Boyd from Manatee County has been sworn in as Senate President designate, so he will become the next Senate President in November of 2026. And then Sam Garrison from Clay County is a House Speaker in waiting. He'll also take over in November of 2026. And so, as you know, in Florida, our presiding officers serve 2 years as leaders of their caucus. And so these two will succeed the current presiding officers. And then we actually know who the next 3 speakers are and the next 3 Senate presidents are, barring any unforeseen circumstances. Special elections is happening right now. We have several vacant seats, some because the governor has made appointments to other positions and created vacancies. We had 1 death in the Florida House, and we have a member, Representative Tomko, who's actually running for a Senate vacancy as a result. And so right now we have 2 vacancies in the Florida Senate. One is District 11, which is now Chief Financial Officer Blaise Ngolia's seat. That seat actually is more likely going to be succeeded with former Representative Ralph Masulo, will more likely end up winning that seat. He is highly endorsed, well-funded, so that seat will remain Republican. And then we have District 14, which was a seat held by now Lieutenant Governor Jay Collins, and that seat will more likely remain Republican. That's the seat the Republicans actually flipped when Jay Collins won. But right now, the front runner for that seat is Representative Josie Tomko. She's highly endorsed. She's raising a good amount of money. It's supposed to be a 3-person Republican race, but most recently, Secretary Melanie Griffin bowed out of the race. And so right now, there's 2 Republicans, with Josie Tomko being the highly endorsed, more favorable candidate. And then there's 1 Democrat in Brian Nathan. All indication, again, is that seat will remain Republican. Josie will win that seat with a lot of support. Then there are 4 vacancies in the Florida House, with 3 going on 4 in the Florida House. And so 3 of those seats are currently were held by Republicans and 1 held by a Democrat. Projections have it that those seats, once they fill, will remain 3 Republican and 1 Democrat. And so there's a lot of election maneuvering going on in that regard that I think is important to note. And then lastly, the elephant in the room. And what's the elephant in the room? It's President Trump. And what he wants and how he wants it. His endorsement bodes really well, and it's aggressive. And there are many Republicans who are way more inclined to appease the president than Governor DeSantis. The governor has had, 6.5 years, really whatever he wants, he gets, and he's gotten. And then when Speaker Perez came in, that kind of changed. And so now that the governor is on his way out and the president still has a little over 3 years to go, what he wants and what he speaks about resonates loud in the state of Florida. And so he is the elephant in the room, and that's not a bad thing. That's just the truth of the matter, that you're really starting to see a lot of members desiring that. We aforementioned about the upcoming dates. So there's 3 more committee weeks, as we see on the screen, and then 2, this session will begin. And so this is really just confirming what Jeff mentioned and I followed up on. I want to share with you now, talk about policy. And so we look at 2026, kind of where we are when we think about bills. Rural Renaissance. Rural Renaissance, as we all know, is a big deal. We were all pretty excited about Rural Renaissance going into last session, and also disappointed as to how it all ended. And so I'm going to speak more about that as I talk about a few more of these topics here. When you see commerce, I don't know, the department has not indicated they're going to have a bill or not. But commerce to me is indicative of a lot of topics, right? So anything, including the public-private partners, those DSOs, those Space Florida, Sports Foundation, Florida Housing Finance, all those things come up to commerce. There is a spaceport bill by Representative Kendall that has actually been filed. That bill is under, to me, the commerce umbrella. That bill is a bill that will get a lot of attention. Representative Kendall and about 16 other Republican House members went to DC, met with the FAA, USDOT, and others, and so she's come back with a bill. A large summary of her bill really is she wants to change the governance of how Space Florida operates and how their board structure is put together. There will be opposing positions on her bill. She's actually going to be having a listening session in December where she's going to want to hear from all those in the industry to kind of hear their reactions. Transportation, last year, the department had a large bill, 1662, that they're still implementing as of right now. And so they may have another bill this upcoming session from what I'm being told by them, but on a much smaller scale. So it won't be as large, probably more cleanup. Usually when you do an omnibus bill, the next year you spend time really trying to clean up or make glitch changes to things that you just didn't think about. Housing, right now, former Senate President Don Gates has a accessory dwelling units bill that he's trying to do, allowing for ADUs to be built on properties. That bill is actually supported by the Florida Realtors and others. And so that bill actually has already been heard in its first committee in the Senate. Is moving. Representative Danny Nix is the House sponsor of that bill. And so that bill probably will get to the finish line this session. It did not pass last session. Live Local, there's still conversations regarding Live Local and what that looks like. The developers still want to try to make some movement as relates to Live Local. But remember now, this is the baby and the priority of former Senate President Kathleen Pasadomo, who was actually entering her last session. I don't foresee there being any changes to Live Local while she's in the legislature. And so I don't think there'll be much of any changes made in that regard. But that falls up under the housing umbrella. Deregulation. Last session, the House Speaker and the House really went after trying to deregulate regulatory boards in the profession world. So your engineers, your accountants, your landscape architects, realtors. And so all indications that they're bringing a bill back this upcoming session. I've been in a few conversations and meetings with the Speaker's office, with committee staff. They're actually going to be bringing back a deregulation bill. The Florida Senate's not on the same page with the Florida House in this regard. And so the argument from the House is they want to do deregulation because they believe three things. Number one, that their current regulatory boards are anti-competition, meaning that they purposely make it very hard for people to enter into the state of Florida from other states or other countries to practice in their profession because of jealousy. Second thing they believe that the process from application to licensure takes way too long. And then thirdly, their argument is that the disciplinary process is more of a slap on the wrist than actually any enforcement. I will tell you that every profession that is being threatened with deregulation would argue against those three narratives, and they have been. And so that's important. Moving Florida forward, this is something that actually got codified in law in 2023, where the department was able to identify and really expedite infrastructure in the state of Florida to really try to put an investment in those spaces sooner than later. Because of the popularity of people moving to Florida, albeit great, our infrastructure is unable to keep up with that mass growth. And so moving Florida forward, it has been and continues to be a big deal. There's been major investments made in there from a general revenue standpoint. And so that will continue in this upcoming session. Special districts, there's bills out there. And these districts are also impacted by whatever happens with property taxes, right? Because so several of them are depending upon property taxes. And so those will be directly or indirectly impacted based on whatever the final product is, if they can get to some kind of agreement. And then immigration still is out there. There's a bill right now by Representative Bernie Jacques dealing with E-Verify. And so immigration is still being talked about. But let's also remember, after this session, there is an election, right? A gubernatorial election. House seats will be up, things of that nature. And so immigration is always a subject that is brought up during election seasons because it polls well. but also because it is still a major topic by President Trump as well. And so these policy highlights are still radiant in the halls of the Capitol. They'll be radiant during the 2026 session. We'll see what happens. On rural renaissance, I wanted to kind of speak of that a little bit more on that. The Senate president has come out most recently and said that he's going to do everything he can to pass rural renaissance this upcoming session. So it will be coming back. He is fully locked in and committed to that. And we all know, because it was his top priority, it became it got held up in the House and became a bargaining chip for the House when they were trying to get other things done. And the Senate president ultimately said, I'm not willing to negotiate against myself. And so he backed off of rural renaissance. But he has come out in a recent article where he has said that he is completely locked in to a rural renaissance getting past this upcoming session. From my understanding, it's going to be very similar to how it was last year as it relates to the ideals in there, from rural healthcare, economic development, education, things of that nature, but also the dollar distributions. And so that's a big deal. We're very, very hopeful that we can get to the finish line on rural renaissance. I know many of you on here play their role and will play a role in that regard. Let me touch budget a bit, and then I also want to definitely make some time for questions. But talking about budget, so it's a state budget. Where we are right now is we are entering into, I would say, our fourth consecutive year of a surplus budget. We're doing really well budgetarily. But I need to put an asterisk next to that, and I'll come back to why I put an asterisk there. But coming into this session, economists have said that Florida is still doing really well from a budget perspective. But there are some concerns as relates to that. So I'll pause there and I'll come back on the next slide and unpause and speak to that. I mentioned about property tax reform. Again, that's going to be the largest conversational topic going into this session, and what that looks like. As we sit here right now, the Florida House released 8 individual property tax bills, which was received from the governor with great frustration and anger. Each of those individual bills that they were to pass would all end up being on the ballot in November of 2026. What constitutional amendments, they don't require the governor's approval. They can go right from a vote to the actual ballot. And so this upcoming committee week on Thursday, the House has a select committee on property taxes. Their plan is to hear each of the 8 bills, allow for question and answer. We're not sure if they're just going to workshop the bills or actually vote on those bills. They have a committee slot from 9 a.m. to 1 o'clock p.m. on Thursday. As of right now, the Senate does not have any companion bills. There are some bills that have been filed by Democratic members, but they're not the companions of the House's 8 bills. And so the Senate's been fairly quiet on property tax as of what they plan on doing or not doing. But that's going to be the largest conversational piece. The governor's stance is complete elimination of property taxes, which is easier said than done, but that's where the governor is. I met with his office just yesterday. I had a conversation with his office yesterday. Met with them actually earlier in the week on Monday. Their plans are to actually release their own property tax proposal. The governor's working on his recs right now, which are due to they're going to release it probably the first week of December. They plan on actually having their own proposal on property taxes. So stay tuned for that. The trust fund. We have seen the governor fully support ship and sale. And those the last couple of years have found themselves being fully funded. I'm going to come back to housing on this next slide as well, dealing with the state budget. We talked earlier about the Job Growth Grant Fund, which we all are very supportive of. And Adam Calloway mentioned on our last webinar, they actually are recommending $50 million in that regard. It's been very, very popular. The unfortunate thing about it is there are still members in the House who don't see the value in Job Growth Grant Fund, but also they see it as a governor's priority. So they've been trying to use it as leverage in negotiations with the governor. Transportation Trust Fund has been getting funded every year. And so a lot of things are fed and funded through the Transportation Trust Fund. That I want to talk about that on the next slide as well. So I'll come back to that. Doc stamps was something that came up majorly last year, where the House Speaker wanted to make some changes to the formula on doc stamps and really try to change. Right now, resiliency, you have resiliency, you have septic to sewer. Those items right now are getting funded through doc stamps and a few other things. And so if you make changes to that, it affects the trust fund for transportation and other things in that regard. The speaker feels like that's available money that can be repurposed for something else. We mentioned about rural infrastructure, department's desire to put more money in that $25 million is their request in their LBR. And so we shall see this upcoming session. If Rural Renaissance passes, of course, they had monies in there as well for this program as well, which was a big deal. I put in governor's legacy because this is the governor's last session. And regardless as to any conversation about needing to be more conservative in the budget, the governor wants to spend money to fund and concretize his priorities. And that's very important to know. And so no matter what the economists are projecting, no matter what the House and Senate is saying, the governor is going to be very aggressive in requesting funding for priorities of his, because again, he's thinking about legacy. And I think that's important. And although we're doing well from a budget perspective, what's important to know is that the economists are recommending that they actually need to start reining in spending, which is a segue into this next slide. So those same economists have met through the revenue estimating conference. And although the 2026 session is slated to be a really, really good session from a budget perspective, we have good money. They're projecting budget reductions in the 2027 and 2028 session and those fiscal years, which is under a new governor and the new speaker and Senate president. So the new governor who would take office in January of 27, right now the economists are projecting there will be major shortfalls. That governor will come in experiencing that. So about $1.5 billion shortfall in 2027-28 fiscal year, and then a $6.6 billion budget shortfall in 2028-2029 fiscal year. As you see, that's a huge growth, even over one fiscal year, from 1.5 to 6.6 billion. And some of you probably are wondering what's leading to that. And so Medicaid spending is a large chunk of the shortfall. Medicaid spending is big, all things healthcare, right? Also, education is a portion of that, but also then the commitment to personnel insurance, right? They have to make sure that they fund that, and so as a result, those three things are the three large contributors of the projected shortfall. There's some minor things as well, but Medicaid spending is a big one. We have 2021, 2022 session and part of 23 session. Florida did really well because we also received a lot of federal dollars. We were able to use the federal dollars to plug holes and then store away a lot of general revenue as a result. Well, all the federal dollars have now been expended for the most part. And so now any budgetary holes or any budget spending are now being done through general revenue. I mentioned on a previous slide, I was going to bring back housing and bring back transportation trust fund. In previous years, the last time we saw a budget reduction exercise of a large amount was in 2020 as a result of COVID. But if you all, some of you have been around since 2007, 2008, and when the market was on a downcline, whenever we go through major budget reductions, trust funds are one of the first things they go after in sweeps. So that puts the Sadowski Housing Trust Fund, makes that vulnerable. That puts all of the professional trust funds at DBPR, for example, but also the Transportation Trust Fund could become vulnerable as well. They tend to want to protect Transportation Trust Fund because they actually see the return on investment with those local infrastructure projects. But all of those trust funds become vulnerable in a shortfall projection because those monies usually are, they sit there ready to be tapped into, but also those trust funds usually replenish themselves over a year just based on fees and dues. If they were to sweep the trust fund, especially Transportation Trust Fund, all of those projects in the 5-year work plan find themselves completely at a halt until they're able to start putting money back into those trust funds. And so, again, right now, economists are saying $1.5 billion shortfall for 2027, 28, and a $6.6 billion shortfall in 28, 29. So when you think about that, every bill that we may find of interest and of importance really becomes secondary to the budget conversation. And so the two largest conversational pieces I would submit to us going into 2026 session is property tax reform and then the state budget. And they're going to be competing as to which one becomes even more important. Property tax to me is the number one priority because the governor's been very vocal about what he wants to do. They've been polling that item. They've been hearing from constituencies in the state of Florida, things of that nature. And then the budget. Now, last thing let me say about the budget, and then I'll pause for questions. The speaker has been on record saying that he wants to rein in spending this upcoming session. They really want to be very disciplined and conservative about how they're appropriating dollars. And they're going to start out with a very conservative budget in the first rollout. By the end of session, we may see some things changing. But what's important to know is what the economists are saying is that if they don't start becoming disciplined in the 2026 budget, they don't actually make an attempt, an actual real attempt to rein in spending, 2026 session, which is one forthcoming, that by 27 and 28 session, Florida's going to be in a really, really bad spot. And these numbers that we're looking at on the screen could end up becoming worse in that regard. So that's important to know and understand. And so the speaker is saying that he wants to really rein in. And I will tell you, Senate President Albritton is also having similar conversations with his members about wanting to rein in spending this upcoming session, because they do not want to put the onus on their successors that to deal with all of this. And so we will see and hear different conversations in Tallahassee. Even in your local delegation conversation, you're going to hear them talk about money being really, really tight. So just take that into consideration, especially when you factor in the governor and speaker not getting along as well. And so we are in the brace for impact. I think it's going to get better as the session progresses, because they're not going to end the session not funding local projects, especially with elections on the back end. But we're going to see them really looking at really eliminate some large chunk priorities, right? If they did not fund all local projects, right, member projects, it still doesn't come up to the dollar amount they need to go to fill a shortfall. Now you're looking at sweeping trust funds. Now you're looking at freezing hiring. Now you're looking at eliminating positions, right? You guys start looking at those things to really try to fill those slots. And so just know that's kind of where things are. I want to end with these last two, just really more graphics. This is the speaker kind of talking about property tax reform and really what their priorities are when it comes to that regard. As I aforementioned, they dropped 8 different individual bills that will each be heard this upcoming Thursday in the House Select Committee. I'm happy to get those bill numbers and links to those bills if you desire to have those. But the speaker's been very, very aggressive about this. The governor, in turn, came out and he was even more aggressive in his opposition. And he basically said, as you see in the first line, placing more than one property tax measure on the ballot, basically is killing property taxes altogether. The speaker's counter to the governor's argument is the governor's doing a lot of talking, but he has yet to release an actual priority on property taxes. And so the speaker's argument is we gave you 8 different options so we can begin the conversation and see how it all ends up. And so this is going to continue, ladies and gentlemen, throughout session, and it will only intensify, right, as they're arguing through all of this. And so again, property tax, state budget, well, to me, will be the number 1, number 2 most talked about items during session. And Beth and Jeff and Casey, those are end of my slides. Happy to take any questions from anybody, anything that I said, or even address any rumors you all may be hearing.
Darrick, great presentation. I got a lot of questions. I'll just choose one for right now. Looking at the policy priorities and budget items, are there any items on there that you feel are more or less, and it doesn't need to be bipartisan these days, but more or less sure wins?
For policy?
And budget.
For me, rural renaissance is to me should be a sure win. Now, again, it gets caught up in politics, right? The speaker's whole thing with the president was he thought they came in with an agreement on how they wanted to address certain things, and he felt like the Senate president reneged. And so halting rural renaissance in the House really was all about retaliation. But to me, that's a win because that's statewide. All of the members, no matter what your party is, actually can claim victory when it comes to that. So that's a huge win. Moving Florida forward is a big win because it's actually addressing Florida's infrastructure throughout the state of Florida. So it's not just one part; it's concentrated through the entire state. So that to me is also a big win. From a budget perspective, Job Growth Grant Fund is a big one. And I will tell you, there are members in both parties who actually will speak to Job Growth Grant Fund and what they've been able to see it do. And it's gone from being the Rick Scott Fund to now really seeing the value in the Job Growth Grant Fund. The largest one on this screen, I will tell you, is Transportation Trust Fund. That one there is a sure win. Members do their very best to protect that trust fund because they actually see the benefit in their local communities. I would argue the most vulnerable on this slide, in my opinion, is the housing trust fund, because if they're going to look to try to address any budget shortfalls or reining spending, this trust fund in years past has always been vulnerable for being hit and be hit in a major, major way. And so I think that's important for us to just know. The transportation trust fund usually gets the most protection of especially the majority party, and then the housing trust fund is vulnerable every single year as to whether or not it's going to get the support that it needs. The governor usually supports it, as does the Senate. The House every year switches out whether they think it's valuable or not valuable.
Appreciate that. David, I think you were next.
All right, thank you, Casey. Darrick, great presentation. Thank you so much. David Coddington of the Greater Fort Lauderdale Alliance. A couple questions. You mentioned the spaceport piece and the potential changes to Space Florida. What would be those potential changes to Space Florida? Any idea?
I'm glad you asked. Let me pull that up. I actually had it. Let me pull it up and I'll share that with you guys. Oh, I'm sorry. Wrong folder. A lot of folders here. All right, so it's House Bill 335.
Okay.
By Representative Kim Kendall, as I mentioned. And so again, she and several members went to DC over the summer and met with FAA and USDOT, and also had a chance to meet with President Trump for more of a photo op. But I had a chance to meet. But she's come back and wants to make Space Florida and really this industry her priority. And so she wants to, you kind of see some bullet points here, but she wants to really change the oversight of Space Florida, right? So she wants to try to add in some ex officio members, non-voting, but kind of add more in that regard. She feels like the board structure right now is too small and outdated based on where they see the space community going. So she really wants to grow out that board. She wants to really try to create, give the locals more control as to what's going on. And she's using, David, she's using kind of right now, Department of Transportation kind of have their local office, as you guys know, well, local secretaries. She kind of sees that motto as a good opportunity to kind of really make more of a local impact and allow the locals to have way more authority. I'm not going to say she wants assistant secretaries, but really give more control to local operations in that regard. And then I think one thing that's important to note is I don't know how involved Space Florida actually has been in her drafting of this bill. I have not spoken to Space Florida yet in this regard. I know that she hasn't talked yet to the industries, which is why I mentioned she's going to have a listening session in December. But she really wants to kind of start spilling a lot of it down to the locals as much as possible. A lot of them have way more involvement in their local communities on how we do spaceports and space in general.
Would it be just, so we've got a couple different projects with Space Florida going on right now.
Yes, sir.
But it's not, so there's space, but it's also aerospace, right? So it's
correct.
Right.
A lot of aerospace, correct.
Right. So, so any additional local piece would be fine, but I'm just trying, I just wanted to make sure I understood in reference to any potential changes, not just space, but continuing as aerospace, aviation, and space.
Correct. That's correct.
One other quick question.
Also, this would be retrospective.
Okay.
I'm talking about it'd be prospective. I'm sorry, prospective. So it wouldn't affect anything that's currently in the pipeline. At least not supposed to. It would be forward thinking. But yes, aviation is involved in that as well.
All right. And then another quick, you mentioned infrastructure and the property tax, reducing or eliminating property tax. We all know it would just really be difficult for county, city, and so much of that.
Yes.
But on the infrastructure, so when you mentioned the challenges with the state infrastructure, is that state infrastructure or does that include county infrastructure? Because obviously your city, because that wouldn't be impacted by the reduction in revenues by eliminating the property tax.
That's a great question. I'm happy glad you brought that up. So the conversation I've been a part of is, and we know anything with property taxes will have an impact on local governments. And the reason why I would argue that you're seeing the challenges. So the governor's office, when I talk to them, they're really trying to work through three major challenges with the governor's desire to eliminate property taxes. Number one is how do you minimize impact on fiscally constrained counties, right? Because there is no other tax base to be able to plug that in. Secondly is how do you protect first responders, mainly law enforcement? They've always been very, very supportive of the governor. in that regard. And then lastly is how do you really fortify to the best possible education in schools, which is, as you know, that brings in locals. What you're not hearing a lot of is how do you actually fortify local governments? Then the Association of Counties and League of Cities speaking to it from the governor's perspective or even the House's perspective. And their bills actually speak um, to locals, but they're actually not bringing them to the table in the formatting of their actual bills. Um, Anything that I've been hearing, and again, this is all going to change, right? So what we're hearing today is going to change by tomorrow, but local government is going to be majorly impacted. And one thing I've been telling people to consider this, when you're hearing the chief financial officer speaking about DOGE and they're out there, when you see Blaze and Goli, our CFO, going to various counties and cities and he's pointing out excessive spending, as he's calling it, don't look at that exercise separate from looking at property taxes. To me, they're merged into one. Because if you can point out monies that you feel are being overly spent or mishandled, the argument basically is we're finding money in these local governments that could be going toward this. What is this? This will end up being, if we get rid of property taxes in Orange County, for example, we just found $2 billion, my number, $2 billion of wasteful spending. If they were to prioritize their spending, there's monies that they can use to plug in their property tax hole. And so to me, both exercises are working together. At some point, they'll come together. They're not talking about it right now, but don't look at them separately, in my opinion. You'll see them together. The locals are loud and arguing what the impact will be, especially a complete elimination of property taxes, what that impact will be. But it's been pretty quiet from the House's proposals and even from the governor's office as of right now as to their concern about its impact on local government. I feel like the local governments can figure it out over time.
Gotcha. Awesome. Thank you.
Mark, I think your hand's up.
Mark Cruz.
Mr. McGhee. Hello,
What's up,
everybody.
sir? How
Hope
you
y'all are
doing,
doing
man?
well. Great presentation, sir. Thank you.
You, sir.
I was noticing, happened to see on the agenda for Senate Tedapropes next week, Department of Commerce is making presentation on economic development. And I have to say, I haven't seen that, those two words in front of the legislature in a presentation in a long time. I think we can all agree that it's been a while since there's been a discussion of economic development. Now, I don't know if it's any more than just a presentation on their things that they have that cost money to do, like job growth grant funds and things like that. But I don't know if you've heard anything from the Senate staff or committee as to what led them wanting to hear a presentation on economic development.
Yeah, so great question, Mark. So, and you know this, I mean, of the two chambers, the Senate's always been the more favorable to economic development, which is, and they've always been the ones who stood ground as long as they possibly could on economic development. Only thing that I've heard going into next week in that committee, so Senator DeSigley actually chairs that committee. For those who don't know, he's out of the St. Pete area. My only understanding is they're really trying to just speak about what all encompasses economic development. And part of it is almost a launch pad to the reintroduction of rural renaissance. So there'll be some conversations about job growth grant fund and other things that make it up. Also, I think they're going to talk about there's still some obligations that Florida has on current contracts, right? So if you ever look at like $22.5 million is always in the department's budget because they still have to fulfill their contractual obligations on current economic development deals. But the only thing I really have heard, and I haven't delved into it yet, is they're trying to really re-educate members on what all is encompassing economic development and how this all works out. So really at a high level. I think the secretary is doing a presentation. I'm not 100% certain on that, but that's as much as I know as of right now. But I will tell you, I was also surprised to see that because they kind of have backed away from it. And so the Senate doing this and putting it on the agenda to me is a big deal. But again, they want to reintroduce rural renaissance and they have economic development involved in that. And so I think it's going to play together at some point.
And the other thing I would add is I heard that the legislative affairs director for the department might make the presentation because I think
Oh, okay.
the secretary is at Frida.
That's right. He's at Frida. That's right. He's going to be at Frida
So
speaking. That's correct.
right. So we'll
Correct.
see how that what happens there. Yeah.
That is correct.
Great. Thanks a lot, Darrick.
Thank you, man.
Other questions from the floor? I want to make sure we leave plenty of time for our
Correct.
discussion on legislative priorities. But as that's been, oh, we do have a comment from the group, from the chat, is have there been any discussions on the selection of Opportunity Zones 2.0, how that will be handled?
I have not heard anything yet on that. I'll do some inquiry on that and get back to Beth, but to date, I haven't heard anything on that.
Great. Well,
Derek, can
as
I
the,
add something
go ahead.
on that?
Go ahead, Mark.
It just turned out when I was in Governor Scott's office, I was lucky enough to have to manage the 1.0 opportunity zone process. And folks have asked about that in the past. And I honestly think I could be wrong, but my recollection was it takes congressional action to do another round of opportunity zones. So that's my recollection from that experience.
And I'll just add to that, Jeff Hendry and I are serving on the statewide working group for Opportunity Zones 2.0, and there has been a projected timeline as to how this is going to be handled. So I can get with you offline, Cindy, and share that timeline.
Great.
And
Thank you.
Can we share that with the
I'd
group?
add-
Actually,
The only
be
thing I'd
interested
add
see
to that, the only thing I'd add to that is, we're very, at least hopeful. Let me just let's say use that term, that they're going to allow the locals, both at the county and the city level, at least to identify those opportunity zones that make sense. Not, the process last time, I wasn't part of that. I don't know how many folks were, Mark. I know it wasn't a real fun process for you, but at the end of the day, at least we got an opportunity to, work with our local people to find those opportunity zones that fit a criteria that really matter and have an opportunity to succeed. So at least me and Beth's experience with these folks so far has been very positive. So Secretary's leading that, along with a couple of his key staff. So I know we're getting buttoned up close to when we need to get the interaction going. So I'll leave it at that, but very hopeful.
I think we got one more question and we want to handle in the chat, before we jump into, the area. Darrick, can you see that, or would you like me to read it? This is about Florida facing deficits and needing revenues. I'll read it. Well, reviews commissioned by the Florida legislature in 14, 17, and 2020 clearly indicated QTI program had a steady and robust return on investment. For every dollar refunds, Florida generated $530 in additional revenue. And more on QTI. I don't want to read everything on there, but
yeah, I see it now too.
Despite the benefits of something like QTI, it's a 4-letter word, not a 3-letter acronym. So that is one question. And related to that, how often is revenue estimating right? Over.
I wish Senator Scott was on here because he would tell you never, right? He was never a big fan of the economists, and he usually went opposite of what they were talking about. I think Governor DeSantis kind of has a similar view. The other thing I'll tell you too is the economists. So REC is made up of governor's office, House, Senate, and Amy Baker. They usually argue that Amy Baker always projects very strict conservative projections. And so they tend not to buy into her, meaning the governor's office, because they feel like she always takes a more conservative, the sky is falling approach. And then usually at the end of the session, monies are found. I'll tell you the House and Senate, however, take her projections very, very seriously. And they usually use that as their baseline for how they address their budget. And so just know, that's why I mentioned earlier, the governor's going to be very aggressive in his proposals because he's not listening to Amy Baker. She's actually a staffer of the Florida legislature. And so he's listening to his own people, but also he's looking at the revenues they have stored away. Raise the QTI. There's been no new conversations on any economic development. Obviously, these were incentives of late, QTI included. And then lastly, on SB 180, tell you to stay tuned on 180 because there had been some conversations about making some glitch changes to 180 as they're implementing that. I haven't seen anything yet, but I was a part of a conversation where they may be bringing something back on 180, and I'll keep you all abreast on that.
I've got to hear what she's saying.
I'll pass it on to you guys. I know Beth has to do the meeting meter, but I'm happy to take any questions afterwards through email. I'm happy to get answers back to everyone.
Okay, so if you haven't had a chance to log into Mentimeter, you can put your phone up to the QR code and use your phone as your device You can also use your desktop as your device. Just go to menti.com and type in this code. So if you could just kind of raise your hand when you feel like you're logged in, you're ready to participate. Looks like there's about 18 people that have joined, 19. We're getting some likes. And we currently have about 31 people on the call. It's coming up a little higher. Good. Does anybody need any technical assistance? Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and start. So this is a multiple choice question. Which of these priorities are of importance to your organization? And these categories have been part of FEDC's legislative priority sheet over the past 3 years. And I'll go ahead and read them. Florida's business brand, affordable housing, ready sites, workforce training, GDP growth in rural Florida, rural infrastructure fund, funding for that program, funding for the job growth grant fund, and maintaining local business tax discretion. And that meaning that over the past 2 years, and a bill has already been filed for this year, there is bills to eliminate the local business tax and have statewide control over that. So we're currently at 20 votes out of 31, getting up to 24 responses. And it's showing an emphasis in ready sites, workforce training, the funding models, and affordable housing as those highest ranked areas. And I'll just go through these 4 slides and then we can have some conversation. So this is an open-ended question. Are there any additional priorities for policy changes, new policy, or programs that you and your organization are looking at that maybe were not covered in the previous options? So I do see that we're getting some upvotes on certain topics, which is great. And then we're also going to have a chance to vote on each of the topics that are being posted in case there's something you've seen that you'd like to emphasize. Okay. So some of the things here, surplus lands, broadband. Can somebody give a little bit of an explanation as to surplus lands, broadband? You'll have to come off mute. Okay. So we'll go ahead and start voting. So this will give you an opportunity to upvote any of those that were on the screen. Okay. So if we conclude the voting, you can kind of see here that water was our most popular, electrical supply and reliability, the manufacturing bill, which we'll circle back to Darrick on, a spec building program, the rural toolkit, and greater R&D tax credits. So this is a slide. Which of these incentive programs have you used in your work? Rural Infrastructure Fund, Job Growth Grant Fund, Triumph Gulf Coast Fund, Incumbent Worker Training, Quick Response Training, Community Development Block Grant, Ad valorem tax exemption, a custom local incentive program, and the High Impact Performance Incentive. And of course, you can choose any and all. Earlier this year, at our conference in May, FEDC released a study that was commissioned through the foundation in partnership with St. Lucie EDC on how many custom local incentive programs exist across Florida. And I think this survey is kind of indicative of the use of those programs. And of course, we know ad valorem tax exemption, while in state statute, has to be adopted at the local level in order to be effective in that jurisdiction. So seeing some similar use across those 4 areas. Along with the QRT. Okay. And then this is our last question. Are you familiar with Select Florida as the state's business brand and marketing program? And then, you know, if you're a member, you might be fully aware and utilizing all of these tools. If you're only somewhat aware, we can certainly help there. And if you'd like to learn more, I'll be able to reach out, or you can email me because this is anonymous. So you can reach out. Janet Janarain is on the call. She can help us as well. But we can put you in touch with a lot of folks that can help you get more familiar and get involved. FEDC is meeting alongside of Select Florida for each of their quarterly meetings. So that's great. You can participate through the board of directors and committee structure with FEDC. And then the very next day, typically we do day 1, day 2. There's a day-long Select Florida meetings. And again, being a part of the partner program or as a state MOU partner with Select Florida is a great way to get involved. And then the third area of involvement is the Economic Development Advisory Committee. And there's some opportunities for investment there as well. So we can help you get more involved at the state level. And Casey, that includes the collaboration here, the interactive portion. So I'll turn it back over to you.
Well, excellent job, and thank you all for contributing to our efforts. This is not the end of the road by any stretch of the imagination, and we're going to need every one of us, our ideas and our engagement to pull this thing forward. So thank you again, Darrick. Excellent job, and appreciate our partnership that we have together. So if there are no more questions, and Darrick, again, I want to thank you for being available to our larger group for future questions and answers, but very much appreciate your engagement and everybody's time. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.